Welcome to another breadcrumbs video. We are in 2 Samuel. We're in chapter 24 today, and we're also looking in Chronicles chapters 21 and 22. So we have a very interesting story recorded in these verses for us. And it's a time when the Lord says he's angry with Israel, and he caused David to take a census. And so David ends up taking a census. Joab actually resists him and says this isn't a good idea. And the Lord actually is moving in some judgment against Israel, and presents David with a choice of either 3 years of famine, where he's going to run for 3 months from enemies, or he'll have a severe plague in the land of Israel for 3 days. David chooses to fall into the hands of the Lord, and he chooses the 3 days of intense famine. 70,000 people die. The Lord is moving into Jerusalem, and David goes out and makes an appeal to the Lord and says, "This is my fault. Please don't kill these people." The Lord relents, stops the angel of death from moving, and David decides to set up an altar there to the Lord at the word of the Lord from the prophet Gad. And this ends up being the temple site. Eventually, we find out from 1 Chronicles 22 that this is where David is going to begin to gather supplies. He's going to set up the temple at this place. He knows that he's not going to be allowed to build it due to blood being on his hands, but Solomon will be the one to build the temple. And so that's where our reading ends today. But we have an interesting story here where the Lord is angry with Israel. And we don't know what is going on necessarily contextually. We know Israel has historically fallen into idolatry. There's rebellion. And here we're confronted with an uncomfortable truth. The Lord is a judge. And so he's going to move in judgment against Israel. He causes David to slip in his leadership and make a bad decision to do the census. David's still guilty for making the decisions. And so it's just a challenging piece of scripture here, that the Lord is going to discipline those that he loves. That's a fact, a truth about the character of God. He doesn't suspend one of his attributes to exercise another. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't suspend his love to exercise judgment or justice, but he's always just and he's always loving. And I know this is not an easy scripture for us to think about, but it resulted in 70,000 people dying. But the Lord is disciplining Israel. Israel is fallen into sin in some capacity, and the Lord is moving in judgment. And it's just an interesting story, as Israel's called to put their trust in God alone, not to trust in their armies, not to trust in their wealth, not to trust in other nations around them to deliver them. And so taking a census is basically finding pride in strength of numbers, strength of your armed forces, strength in your own, or pride in your own strength. And so the Lord is challenging Israel to come back to him, to worship him alone. We can see that pattern repeating all throughout the scripture. That is, Israel turns to other sources of hope or protection or deliverance, other gods. The Lord does move in judgment and discipline for his people. In fact, Isaiah chapter 40 says that Israel's paid double for her sins. And so the Lord does hold accountable for our choices. And so he causes David to make some decisions here that set up these actions. But even in the midst of all that, it's interesting that this ends up being the site for the temple. And so this is part of David's prayer. He just has it in his heart that he wants to build God a house. And this site where this judgment is coming forth, the Lord actually tells the angel of death to stop. And this ends up being the place. David ends up buying it's called the threshing floor of Araunah. And Araunah actually offers it to David free of charge. And David says, "I'm not going to offer a sacrifice to the Lord that costs me nothing." which is another important principle that's laid out here. David pays 50 pieces of silver, acquires the land, makes the sacrifice to the Lord, the intercession for the people. The plague stops. God relents, and David begins to make preparations for the temple site. And so it is an interesting, kind of development here in the story that where God is judging, he's also going to be bringing some restoration and healing. And I think that's an aspect of God's character. He is going to discipline those that he loves, but he's also going to provide hope and restoration in the midst of that discipline. So we have a very interesting story today. Those are just a few thoughts on it as we're looking at the story of David taking the census, God disciplining the people of Israel, but also leading to a point where supplies and the vision for the temple is coming more and more into some clarity and into a mode of preparation here as David prepares things for all the supplies and materials for Solomon to execute the vision here in the near future. So hope you guys are enjoying 2 Samuel and the story of David, and I hope that this story just provokes some thoughts in you about the Lord, and as we're learning about him and what he wants from us as his people. So God bless you all. We'll look forward to talking more about the story of David on Monday night. God bless you.